There's something about abandoned places that hold sound in a strange way. It doesn't echo like you'd expect. It gets swallowed. Like the building's been hungry for years, and it's finally got something to chew on. That's what I remember most about that day. The quiet wasn't empty. It felt thick, like I had to walk through it. Anyway, let me back up. This happened back in 2012, when I was still living at home, just a couple years out of high school. I was going through a weird phase, honestly. Kind of stuck in that in-between place where you're not a kid anymore, but you're not really anything yet either. I didn't have a real job, just a few shifts a week, helping my uncle clean up foreclosure properties. And in my free time, I did a lot of what people now call urbex, though we didn't use that term. We just said we were exploring. There was an old hospital on the edge of our county, tucked back behind a collapsed parking garage and a line of twisted trees. It'd been closed for over a decade, and it had this weird reputation. Nothing like ghost stories, really. Just that people got weird after going there. Someone got locked inside once when the doors jammed. A girl I knew came back from exploring it and didn't talk to anyone for like 3 weeks. That kind of thing. I should have known better. I wasn't even looking for anything exciting that day. I just wanted to take a few photos. I went alone. I had my phone, a headlamp, and an old army backpack with snacks and a bottle of water. It was cold inside. Colder than it should have been for spring. The building had this dull, pale light seeping in through the high windows, like the sun didn't really want to be there either. The pediatric wing was on the 2nd floor. I don't know why I went there. Maybe because it felt smaller, safer. The rest of the building was full of wide, echoey corridors, but that wing was tight, short hallways, smaller doors, softer colors. Faded murals of cartoon clouds and balloon animals were still clinging to the walls, peeling like old scabs. I found room 209 by accident. The door was stuck a little, but when I pushed, it creaked open with that horrible sound like a metal throat clearing. The room was basically untouched. Bed frames still bolted to the floor, broken blinds twitching slightly with the breeze from a cracked window. The mattress was warped, but still intact, covered in an old sheet that had gone yellow in the corners. I remember thinking it looked more like a dorm room than a hospital. There was a pillow still on the bed, and under it, like someone had placed it there recently, was a notebook. Blue cover, wide-ruled, kind of puffed and worn with age. There was a name scribbled in thick pencil across the front, Aiden. I know how that sounds. Too perfect, right? Like a setup. But I swear, it was just there, like it had been waiting. I sat on the floor with my back to the wall and started reading. Feb 4. This is my new room. I have a bed and a window. Beau is here. He's my bear. He still smells like Mom's closet. I had a weird dream, but I don't remember it. There was a noise in the hall like a dog walking funny. Feb 6. Nurse gave me apple slices today, but they were mushy. I ate them anyway. The TV in the group room doesn't work, but the boy said he can still see things on it. I don't know what he means. Feb 9. I had the dream again. Something was under my bed, but I couldn't move. I tried to yell, but my mouth was full of water. When I woke up, Beau was under the bed too. He never falls. I remember pausing there. At that point, it still seemed like the ramblings of a scared, or maybe traumatized kid. Nothing too crazy. Sad, mostly. But something about that line, my mouth was full of water, bothered me. Kids don't say stuff like that unless they've seen something, or felt something. I kept reading. Feb 10. There's a boy who doesn't blink. He stands in the corner of the hallway. He doesn't move, but he's closer every time the light goes out. Feb 11. Nurse Carla says I'll be moved soon. The hospital is too old. They say it's not safe, but the boy says that's a trick. He says the place isn't falling down, it's falling through. Feb 12. I tried to stay awake, but I kept hearing it ticking, like a clock but wrong. It was coming from the vent. I think the boy lives in there when it's daytime. Feb 13. I touched the wall where the paint is peeling, and it felt warm. It's never warm in here. It was beating like a heart. I should have stopped. Honestly, I should have left the notebook right there and walked out. But it felt like putting down a story right before the twist. Like I owed it to Aiden to finish it. Feb 14. Boomer lost an eye. He didn't used to have a mouth, but now he does. I heard him whisper when the lights were off. He said I was almost soft enough. Feb 16. Nurses stopped coming in. I think they left. I think the whole hospital is asleep now, and I'm the only one awake. Feb 17. I saw myself in the mirror, and it wasn't me. It smiled. I didn't. Feb 18. They said the boy went away. But now I think I'm the boy. I closed the notebook and just sat there. My legs had fallen asleep, but I couldn't feel anything. The room had gotten colder, noticeably colder. The wind outside stopped. Everything went so still that I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I don't really remember leaving. I just remember being in my car with the notebook on the passenger seat, driving home on autopilot like I'd picked something up I wasn't supposed to touch. At home, I put the notebook in an old metal box I used to keep my passport and savings in, locked it with a padlock. I didn't tell anyone. Weeks passed. Life moved on. I tried not to think about it. Then, one night, maybe 3 months later, I decided to look at the diary again, just to make sure I hadn't imagined it. I still had the key. The box was still under my bed. The lock was still intact, but the notebook was gone. Not stolen, not misplaced. Gone. The box was empty. I don't have an explanation. I'm not even sure what I believe anymore. I don't talk about this often. People always think you're trying to sell them a story, but it never felt like a story. It felt like a door I walked through without realizing, and something walked back with me. I was supposed to take this to my grave, but I will share it here. I moved back in with my mom after college, into the same creaking old house I grew up in, tucked behind the overgrown tree line that borders the ruins of Gravenhurst State Hospital. The place has been sealed off for decades, but the stories never died. When I was a kid, they told us it was haunted, that a man named the janitor still walked the halls at night, pushing his rusted cart, searching for the children who escaped his care. Every town has its version of that kind of urban legend, but something about Gravenhurst always felt too specific to be entirely made up. I used to stare at it from my bedroom window, the skeletal outline of the main building jutting out from the treetops like the remains of some dead animal. Back then, I never thought much about what really went on in there, but now, after everything I've been through, I can't stop thinking about it. College wasn't kind to me. The anxiety came first, then the spirals, the sleepless nights, the numb days, the silence I couldn't explain. I ended up on medication, therapy, the whole routine. My life narrowed down to surviving week to week. And through it all, I kept thinking about those kids locked inside Gravenhurst half a century ago. Kids like me. Kids with panic attacks, or sensory issues, or who just needed a quiet room and someone patient. But instead, they were locked in concrete cells, misdiagnosed, restrained, forgotten. Some of them never left. A few weeks ago, on a restless night, I made the decision to finally go inside. I didn't tell anyone. Not my mom, not my old friends, no one. It wasn't just that I knew they'd try to talk me out of it. It felt personal. Like something I needed to do. For closure, maybe. Or for clarity. I told myself I was just curious, but that wasn't the whole truth. A part of me felt drawn there, like the building had been waiting. Gravenhurst was about a 10-minute walk through the woods behind my neighborhood, but it felt longer that night. The air was heavier than usual, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. I went just after midnight, flashlight in hand, backpack on my shoulders with water, gloves, and a crowbar I didn't really know how to use. When I got to the rusted perimeter fence, I wasn't surprised to find a hole already cut through the chain links. The local teens had been sneaking in for decades. Some left behind their beer cans and cigarette butts. Others never came out. I stepped through and stood still for a moment, staring up at the main structure. Even in its decay, the hospital looked massive. Rows of broken windows like black, empty eyes, moss-covered brickwork. The letters over the entrance, Gravenhurst State Hospital, were barely legible, half swallowed by vines. Something about it made my stomach tighten. like I was standing in front of something not abandoned, but asleep. Inside, the air was stale, as if nothing had moved in years. The foyer opened into a wide corridor, the kind you see in old photos of asylums: checkered floors, peeling paint, the faint stink of mildew and rotting insulation. My flashlight barely cut the darkness. Every footstep echoed, like someone was walking behind me just slightly out of sync. I told myself I'd only explored the first floor, just enough to say I'd done it. But after a while, the adrenaline overtook the fear. I crept down one hallway, then another, peeking into rooms where rusted bed frames sat like skeletons. File cabinets overturned, straps still bolted to exam tables. In one room, the walls were covered in childlike drawings, stick figures with X's for eyes, crude suns, tall men without faces. I lingered too long in that room, because that's where I heard the sound. It was soft at first, a scuff, then something like a giggle, not playful, not from a place of joy. It sounded warped, tired, like a child pretending to laugh, but not remembering how. I turned off the flashlight. I know how that sounds, but I did it without thinking. Something in me whispered that the light was a beacon, that whatever made that sound was looking for it. I stood in the dark, barely breathing, waiting. The laughter stopped. Then came the footsteps. Light, uneven, like bare feet on tile, getting closer. I backed into the hallway and slipped behind a half-open door, holding my breath as something passed by the doorway. A shape, low to the ground, shuffling. I didn't get a clear look. I didn't want one. But I saw just enough to know it wasn't an animal, and it wasn't an adult. I waited until the air shifted again, until I could hear the thing's footsteps fading into the opposite corridor. Then I ran. I didn't even try to be quiet. I made it to the stairwell at the far end of the hallway and ducked inside, slamming the door behind me. I was about to leave, really I was, when I saw the mural. It covered the stairwell wall from floor to ceiling, a child's painting, faded and flaking but still mostly intact. It showed a sun in the sky, some birds, a crooked blue house, and a line of children, holding hands, walking into the house with smiles on their faces. Except the last child in line wasn't smiling. Its face was blank, white, featureless. Someone had scratched into the wall around that child, hundreds of tiny marks, like fingernails scraping at plaster over and over and over again. I took a photo. I don't know why. Instinct, maybe. But the second the flash went off, something moved behind me. A whisper. Right in my ear. Stay in line. I bolted. Up the stairs this time. Don't ask me why. Fight or flight gets scrambled in moments like that. I just ran. The upper floors were worse, colder, like they hadn't been touched by sunlight in 100 years. The silence was thick, but it wasn't empty. I kept hearing little things, footsteps in other rooms, the creak of doors moving slowly, breathing that wasn't mine. Then I found the children's ward. The paint on the door had long since chipped away, but the sign was still readable. Children's ward, 2B. Something told me not to open it. Every cell in my body said turn around, but I did it anyway. The hallway beyond was narrower, with tiny rooms on either side, each no larger than a walk-in closet. Tiny iron beds bolted to the floor. In one, there was a stuffed rabbit, moldy and slumped over like it was too tired to keep pretending. In another, a chalkboard with names written in faded pink: Maggie, Timmy, Alice. But the last room on the left had no bed, just a chair. And restraints, child-sized. The wall behind it was smeared with something dark, too old to be blood, but too thick for paint, and over, scratched into the plaster in uneven, jagged lines, was the same phrase: I didn't belong here. I snapped another photo, hand shaking. The second the shutter clicked, I heard the laughter again. But this time, it wasn't distant. It was right outside the door. I backed into the room, pressing myself into the corner. My flashlight flickered once, then died. I don't know how long I stayed there. Minutes? Hours? The laughing never stopped. It circled the room, over and over, sometimes dipping into a giggle, sometimes rising into a shriek. Then, silence. When I finally built up the courage to move, the door was open again. I ran. I don't remember how I made it out. Just flashes of stairwells, the shattered main corridor, the cold night air hitting my lungs like ice. I collapsed on the front lawn of Gravenhurst and didn't move for a long time. If you've ever tried driving through a major US city on the 4th of July, you know it's hell on earth. I don't care what state you live in. Something about fireworks and barbecues turns every highway into a parking lot. I had plans that day. Real plans. I was supposed to meet up with friends in the next town over for a cookout and drinks. I even left early, trying to beat the rush, but I didn't even make it halfway before I got swallowed by a sea of brake lights and chaos. Eventually, I gave up. I was crawling at like 5 miles per hour, bumper to bumper, surrounded by angry honks and people yelling out their windows. It just wasn't worth it. I pulled off the interstate, found a side road, and told myself I'd just head home and maybe catch some fireworks from my front porch. But instead, I pulled into this random little lot not far from an old hospital I'd driven by a dozen times before, but never really noticed. It wasn't a big, imposing place, just this faded 4-story building tucked behind a crooked fence, surrounded by what looked like an overgrown lawn. I always thought it was one of those long-term care facilities. You know, where they house elderly patients with dementia, maybe some rehab patients too. A few windows still had yellowed curtains. A broken sign out front just said WAS Care Center. The first word had long since worn off. I wasn't planning to stop. I wasn't planning to get out. But sitting there, watching the sky go pink with sunset and hearing distant fireworks crackle, I felt this pull. I wish I could say it was curiosity. It wasn't. Not entirely. It felt more like the way your tongue keeps going back to a chipped tooth, like I needed to look. So I left my car running, left my drink in the cup holder, took nothing with me except my phone, which was already at about 40%. I walked up the crumbling concrete path, through the unlocked front doors that groaned like something being woken up. Inside was dead quiet, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Dust floated in the shafts of light breaking through cracked window panes. The lobby had that old sour smell like bandages and basement mildew. One of the wheelchairs was tipped over by the wall, and someone had drawn smiley faces all over the wallpaper in what looked like crayon. I should have turned around. I really should have. But I didn't. I kept walking. The hallway ahead split into two, with elevators in the center and a stairwell door on the side. I didn't trust the elevator, no way. So I pushed open the stair door and climbed, floor by floor, phone flashlight pointed at the steps. I passed the second floor. Nothing. The third, a little colder, but still nothing. Then I reached the fourth. The stairwell opened into a hallway that felt different. The air was thick, not just with dust, but with that sharp chemical hospital scent that shouldn't have still been there after all these years. The walls were yellowing. Every door was slightly open, just enough to look like they were waiting. That's when I saw something move. At the far end of the hall, just barely in the edge of my light. It was slow, unnatural, like someone dragging themselves forward inch at a time. My body froze up, heart jackhammering, breath shallow, but I didn't bolt. I should have, but some stupid part of me needed to see what it was. My flashlight jittered in my hand as I raised it higher. That's when she came into view. An old woman, thin, frail-looking. She had 2 canes, one in each hand, and she moved like her whole body was bent forward at a terrible angle, like her spine had caved in on itself. Her gown was tattered, and I couldn't make out her face at all, just a mess of white hair and shadow. She didn't speak, didn't moan or cry or call out. She just kept walking toward me, slowly, like she had all the time in the world. I started backing up. My brain was screaming at me to run, but I was stuck between fear and disbelief. Something about her wasn't right. Not just the way she moved, but the way she seemed to push back the light, like it didn't want to touch her. And then she stopped, right in the middle of the hallway. And without warning, Her whole body snapped upright, like a puppet yanked by invisible strings. She stood tall, too tall. Then she ran. Not limped, not shuffled. Ran, full speed, straight at me. Her footsteps slapped the floor like wet hands, her mouth hanging open in a horrible silent scream. Her face was wrong, stretched, too smooth, no eyes. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran. I didn't take the stairs one at a time. I jumped, scraped my hands on the railing, twisted my ankle somewhere between the third and second floors. By the time I burst through the stairwell door and out into the front lot, I was shaking so hard I could barely unlock my car. It wasn't until I slammed the door shut and looked down that I realized I was bleeding. A long, deep scrape across my forearm. I didn't feel it at first. I was too amped up, too full of adrenaline. My breathing was fast and shallow. My vision was tunneling. I sat there for almost an hour, shaking, unable to drive. I kept expecting to see her come out the front door, or standing at the edge of the lot, or looking at me from one of the fourth floor windows. Nothing happened. But something had happened to me. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep. I kept having these flashes, hallways with blinking lights, canes tapping against linoleum, a scream I never actually heard, but somehow felt in my teeth. I got diagnosed with panic disorder 2 months later, after I passed out at work during a fire drill. The alarms triggered something in my head, and I just dropped. I've never gone back.